What if I told you that some of history's greatest civilizations didn't fall to war or rebellion, but to something far more unpredictable: the weather? Across the ages, ancient storms and celestial phenomena have silently shaped the fate of entire societies, leaving behind ruins cloaked in mystery. Picture a sudden hurricane swallowing a coastal kingdom whole, or a years-long drought turning a thriving empire to dust. These weren't just natural disasters, they were turning points in human history, rewriting the map of our world. Today, we're diving into the forgotten stories of how climate and the cosmos conspired to build and erase entire civilizations. From whispers in ancient myths to hard evidence buried beneath the earth, we'll uncover how the skies above held the power to decide who thrived and who vanished. And as we unravel these mysteries, you might just start seeing the weather outside your window in a whole new light. Let's begin. Long before meteorology or satellites, ancient civilizations turned to the heavens for answers, and what they saw were gods. When storms raged or droughts parched the land, it wasn't just bad luck, it was divine fury. Take Enlil, the Mesopotamian storm deity whose floods were said to cleanse the earth of human arrogance. Or Tlaloc, the Aztec rain god who could withhold water as easily as he granted it, leaving crops to wither under a merciless sun. These weren't mere bedtime stories, they were survival manuals, coded warnings passed down through generations. Imagine standing in a field as the sky darkened, thunder shaking the ground beneath your feet. To you, it's a storm. To them, it was Enlil drawing his breath. But here's the twist: many of these myths might have been inspired by real, catastrophic events. A devastating flood that reshaped the Tigris Valley, or a generations-long dry spell that starved an empire into collapse. The line between legend and history blurs when you realize how often these stories align with geological records. Ancient people weren't just spinning tales, they were recording trauma, wrapping unimaginable disasters in the only language they had, the divine. And if we listen closely, these myths still whisper secrets about the world's forgotten storms. It's no coincidence that nearly every ancient culture tells some version of the same terrifying story: a great flood swallowing the world whole. From Mesopotamia's epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical tale of Noah, these narratives share eerie similarities: warnings ignored, civilizations washed away, and a handful of survivors left to rebuild. But what if these weren't just morality tales? Geological clues suggest something far more chilling: that our ancestors might have been documenting actual cataclysms burned into collective memory. Take the Black Sea deluge around 5600 BCE, when rising Mediterranean waters burst through natural barriers, submerging an area the size of Florida in months. Entire settlements vanished beneath the waves, forcing migrations that could have spread flood stories across continents. Yet floods were only part of the story. Droughts could be just as devastating, like the one that may have collapsed Egypt's old kingdom, when the Nile failed to rise for decades, turning granaries to dust and sparking famine. Or consider the mysterious downfall of the Akkadian Empire, where archaeological layers shift abruptly from thriving cities to windblown sand, hinting at a sudden climate shift so severe it's been called history's first mega-drought. These weren't isolated tragedies, they were dominoes tipping civilizations into chaos. What ancient scribes called divine punishment, modern scientists now recognize as El Niño cycles or shifting monsoons, proving that the weather didn't just inconvenience these societies, it rewrote their destinies. And that's what makes these stories so haunting. When the Babylonians described gods unleashing floods like onrushing war, or Mayan texts warned of skies turning to stingy dust, they weren't exaggerating, they were bearing witness. The real question isn't whether these disasters happened, but how many cultures they erased before history even began to record them. The Akkadian Empire was a powerhouse of the ancient world, its influence stretching across Mesopotamia like a vast network of trade and culture until the rain stopped. For 300 years, the skies withheld their mercy, turning fields to cracked wastelands and reservoirs to hollow pits. Tree rings from that era tell a silent horror story, their growth stunted year after year, each narrow band a testament to desperation. Sediment cores pulled from the Gulf of Oman paint the same picture, layers of dust carried by winds that once watered crops now stripping the land bare. This wasn't just a bad season, it was a climate reckoning, and the Akkadians weren't alone. Centuries later, the Maya faced their own slow-motion catastrophe. Their towering cities, once bustling with astronomers and artisans, were abandoned so abruptly that meals were left half-eaten in clay pots. Again, the evidence is written in nature. Cave stalagmites from Belize show rainfall patterns plummeting right as Maya society fractured. Even Angkor Wat, crown jewel of the Khmer Empire, met its match in shifting monsoons. Their sprawling canals and reservoirs, engineering marvels designed to harness water, became relics of a wetter past when the rains drifted elsewhere. But here's what's chilling: drought didn't just empty granaries, it unraveled the very fabric of civilization. Starving farmers rebelled against taxes meant for absent harvests. Trade routes withered, cutting off access to tin for bronze or stone for tools. Leaders who claimed divine favor lost legitimacy when their prayers went unanswered. In Akkadian tablets, scribes wrote of people climbing the walls like ants, driven to chaos by hunger. The Maya's collapse wasn't sudden violence, it was a slow fraying as city-states turned on each other for dwindling resources. Yet for every empire crushed by thirst, others were drowned. While the Akkadians baked under endless sun, the Minos of Crete may have met their end in tsunamis triggered by volcanic eruptions. The same climate forces that starved one society could drown another, proving nature's balance had no mercy. What united these civilizations wasn't just their fate, it was their inability to see the threat until it was too late. They built monuments to outlast the ages, never guessing that the real danger wasn't time, but the sky itself. While drought and flood could unravel societies, the monsoon rains of South Asia did something remarkable: they built them. The Indus Valley civilization thrived because its people understood the rhythm of the skies. Each summer, winds heavy with moisture swept in from the Indian Ocean, drenching the land in life-giving rain. This wasn't just weather, it was a clockwork miracle, and the Indus people turned it into an empire. Their cities, like Mohenjo-Daro, were feats of hydraulic genius, with intricate drainage systems and reservoirs designed to capture every precious drop. The streets were laid out in perfect grids, a testament to stability, all because they could count on the monsoons to arrive like clockwork. But that reliability masked a vulnerability. When the rains faltered, whether from shifting ocean currents or distant volcanic eruptions blotting out the sun, the entire system trembled. Archaeologists sifting through Indus ruins find layers where fine pottery and jewelry give way to rubble, suggesting not conquest but slow abandonment. Wells ran dry, crops failed, and people drifted away in search of wetter lands. The same rains that nurtured one of history's first planned cities may have also doomed it when the pattern broke. Yet the most fascinating part isn't just the weather. It's how these civilizations tried to predict it. Without satellites, they turned to the stars, believing celestial events held clues to the coming rains. The Maya tracked Venus with eerie precision, linking its movements to droughts. Chinese astronomers recorded sunspots, fearing their appearance meant poor harvests. Even the Babylonians saw omens in comets, interpreting their fiery trails as warnings of storms or famine. Today, we know some of these connections were real, like how a supernova in 1054 CE left its mark in ice cores, coinciding with climate turbulence worldwide. But for ancient people, the sky wasn't just a weather vane. It was a language, one they strained to decipher. When the monsoons failed or floods surged, they searched the heavens for answers, desperate to understand why the forces that built them could so easily break them apart. Celestial events didn't just light up the night sky for ancient civilizations, they set off alarms. In China, court astronomers meticulously recorded every streak of light, every shadow crossing the sun. A comet wasn't just a spectacle, it was a harbinger of famine or flood, its tail a brushstroke of doom on the imperial records. The Babylonians took it further, treating eclipses like urgent telegrams from the gods. Their clay tablets describe how a darkened sun could mean war, plague, or a king's downfall, omens so dire that rulers would appoint temporary substitutes to bear the divine wrath in their place. But what if these superstitions hid a kernel of truth? Modern researchers have found startling overlaps between celestial events and real climate shifts. Take the Maya, whose Venus tables weren't just for ritual, they were survival tools. By tracking the planet's cycles, priests might have anticipated El Niño's arrival, linking its appearance to the droughts that crippled their cities. Even Halley's comet, spotted in 1666, coincided with London's Great Fire and a brutal winter, fueling beliefs that the heavens dictated earthly chaos. The real revelation comes when science catches up. Solar eclipses can briefly cool the atmosphere, disrupting wind patterns. Comets, those spectacles of ice and dust, sometimes coincide with meteor showers that alter air chemistry. And Venus, its position may subtly influence tidal forces, potentially nudging weather systems. Ancient observers couldn't pass the physics, but their lifetimes of scrutiny revealed correlations we're only now testing with satellites and supercomputers. Perhaps the most haunting example lies in Greenland's ice cores, where layers of volcanic ash from massive eruptions match dates of recorded celestial omens. When the sky darkened, crops failed not by wrath but by ash veiling the sun for years. The Maya called it the time of no dawn. The Chinese blamed dragons. Both were grasping for the same truth. The cosmos and climate were always in conversation. We've traded omens for data, but the question remains, were the ancients reading patterns we've yet to fully understand? The eruption of Thera didn't just shake the Mediterranean, it rewrote the climate. When the volcano exploded around 1600 BCE, it hurled enough ash into the atmosphere to dim the sun for years. Temperatures plummeted, frosts crept into growing seasons, and harvests withered from Egypt to China. The Minos, whose dazzling palaces stood mere miles from Thera, faced tsunamis first, then a slow starvation as their trade networks collapsed under the weight of global famine. Their frescoes of blooming lilies and leaping dolphins suddenly belonged to a world that no longer existed, buried under ash and eternal winter. Yet Thera was just one act in nature's destructive play. Centuries later, another eruption, this time in Iceland, spewed sulfur across Europe, turning the summer of 536 CE into a nightmare. Byzantine scribes wrote of a sun that gave no light, while Chinese records describe snow falling in August. Crops failed, economies crumbled, and the resulting famine may have weakened populations just as the plague of Justinian arrived. Even Rome, already teetering, found its granaries empty and its people desperate. What linked these disasters wasn't just bad luck, it was the terrifying power of volcanoes to hijack the climate itself. The real lesson lies in the aftermath. After each eruption, societies scrambled to adapt. The Minos survivors may have fled to Greece, carrying their artistry to new shores. Medieval monks, shivering through the year without summer, turned to hardy crops like rye that could survive the cold, but the most chilling realization. These eruptions were mere tremors compared to supervolcanoes like Toba, which 70,000 years ago nearly wiped out humanity. The difference between a civilization's survival and its collapse often came down to something as fragile as a single growing season, a thread snapped by forces far beyond human control. And that's what makes these events so unnerving. When we read ancient accounts of darkened skies and withered fields, we're not just hearing myths, we're hearing echoes of real climatological trauma. Thera's eruption wasn't just a local disaster, it was a global warning written in ash. Today, as satellites monitor volcanoes and scientists trace ancient eruptions in ice cores, we're still learning how thin the line between stability and chaos truly is, and how the Earth itself holds the pen that writes history. Some 12,000 years ago, the Earth may have faced a cosmic bullet that changed everything. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis paints a terrifying picture, a fragmented comet slamming into our planet, igniting wildfires across continents, and plunging the northern hemisphere into a sudden ice age. Evidence for this catastrophe hides in plain sight. Layers of sediment rich in platinum and microscopic diamonds, telltale signs of an extraterrestrial visitor. But what makes this theory so compelling isn't just the science, it's the timing. Right around this period, megafauna like mammoths and saber-toothed cats vanish from the fossil record, and early human settlements show signs of abrupt collapse. Take Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest known temple. Its towering pillars carved with eerie animal figures were mysteriously buried around this time, as if someone sealed away a warning. Or the Clovis people of North America, whose advanced stone tools disappear from the archaeological record just as the climate turned glacial. Coincidence? Maybe, but when you find melted rock and nanodiamonds scattered from Carolina to Syria, it's hard not to wonder if our ancestors witnessed the ultimate bad day. Yet this wasn't the only cosmic reset button. 3,600 years ago, a meteorite or comet may have exploded over Mesopotamia, flattening villages with the force of 1,000 atomic bombs. Clay tablets describe flames falling from the sky, while excavations at Tall El Hammam reveal buildings with walls melted into glass, something that only happens at temperatures hotter than volcanic eruptions. The same event might even have inspired Sodom's biblical destruction, blending disaster and myth into one searing memory. What's chilling is how these impacts mirror ancient warnings. The Mahabharata describes blazing celestial chariots bringing ruin. Babylonian astronomers logged fire stars with dread. Even Hopi legends speak of a sky that rained fire, forcing survivors underground. Today, we'd call it an airburst meteor. Back then, it was divine wrath or perhaps a trauma so deep it could only be processed as mythology, the real takeaway. Civilizations rise and fall not just by human hands, but by forces far beyond our control. Whether it's a comet's icy shards or a meteor's fireball, the universe has always held a veto over our best-laid plans. And as modern astronomers track near-Earth objects, we're left with a humbling thought. The next cosmic reset could already be streaking toward us, silent and unseen. High on a hill in Athens, the Tower of the Winds still stands as one of history's first weather stations. Its 8 sides carved with faces of deities who ruled the breezes. Boreas, the north wind with his tangled beard. Notice the south wind clutching an upturned vase, forever pouring rain. Built 2,000 years ago, this marble observatory wasn't just decoration. It was a cutting-edge tool, using sundials and a water clock to track seasonal shifts. The Greeks didn't just fear the weather, they dissected it, believing if they could name the winds, they might tame them. Half a world away, Pacific Islanders navigated storms without towers or clocks, just the language of the sky. They memorized cloud formations that hinted at distant land, watched how swells curved around unseen islands, even charted courses by the flight patterns of seabirds. To them, a red sunset wasn't just beauty, it signaled winds arriving from the east. Waves that peaked sharply warned of hidden reefs, while certain stars flickering low meant rain was coming. This wasn't just survival, it was science passed down in chants and stick maps, a celestial roadmap etched in memory. Yet for all their ingenuity, these early meteorologists faced a cruel irony. The better they understood the weather, the more powerless they became against its extremes. The Tower of the Winds couldn't stop the drought that withered Athenian fields, just as Polynesian voyagers reading the clouds couldn't prevent typhoons from swallowing entire canoes. Their knowledge was a shield, but nature always carried a sharper sword. What's fascinating isn't just their methods, but the blind spots they couldn't see. The Maya tracked Venus to predict drought, yet missed how deforestation worsened their dry spells. The Norse interpreted Iceland's steaming geysers as signs of giants, not realizing they sat atop tectonic powder kegs. Even the Chinese, with their rain-making rituals and earthquake-detecting dragons, couldn't anticipate how volcanic eruptions continents away would starve their crops. Perhaps that's the real lesson, not how much they knew, but how much lay beyond their grasp. Today, armed with satellites and supercomputers, we still watch hurricanes defy forecasts or droughts outlast predictions. The ancients remind us that weather isn't just physics, it's humility. For all our radar and algorithms, we're still decoding the same skies they once begged for mercy, still learning that foresight doesn't always mean control. One of history's most chilling mysteries isn't about a single civilization's fall, it's about how nearly all of them crumbled at once. Around 1200 BCE, the Mediterranean world blinked out like a dying ember. The mighty Hittites, whose chariots once shook battlefields, vanished from history. Egypt's pharaohs barely clung to power as their empire shrank to a shadow. And the bustling ports of Ugarit, where merchants traded copper and ivory, became silent ruins buried under layers of ash. This wasn't just bad luck, it was a domino effect of disasters, each one amplifying the next. Start with the earthquakes. Geological records show the region trembling like a drumskin, toppling palaces and snapping trade routes. Then came the droughts. Tree rings from that era tell of years when rain simply refused to fall, shriveling harvests from Greece to Canaan. But here's the twist, these weren't isolated events. Letters between kings, etched in cuneiform, revealed desperate pleas for food. "There is famine in our house," wrote one ruler to another. "If grain doesn't arrive soon, we will starve." The very networks that had made these civilizations thrive now carried their collapse as each kingdom's crisis bled into its neighbors. Then came the invaders, mysterious raiders the Egyptians called the Sea Peoples. Their origins are still debated, but their impact was undeniable. Burned cities and shattered pottery mark their path, suggesting they weren't just conquerors but refugees themselves, fleeing their own collapsing homelands. Imagine a chain reaction. Quakes break supply lines, drought sparks famine, displaced populations turn desperate, and suddenly, entire societies unravel in a generation. The eerie part, this wasn't just chance. Sediment cores from Cyprus show a sharp drop in rainfall right as the Bronze Age collapsed. Pollen samples reveal forests giving way to scrubland, proof of ecological stress. Even volcanic ash found in ice sheets hints at eruptions that could have dimmed the sun, worsening crop failures. The Bronze Age didn't end because its people failed. It fell because the world around them turned hostile on every front. A lesson in how fragile civilization becomes when nature withdraws its favor. And perhaps that's the real warning hidden in this ancient catastrophe. These societies didn't just share trade goods, they shared vulnerabilities. When the climate shuddered, no amount of gold or armies could save them. The ruins they left behind whisper a question we're still grappling with today. What happens when the systems we rely on, weather, crops, stability, decide to rewrite the rules? Off the coast of ancient Peru, fishermen once hauled in nets bursting with anchovies until the ocean turned warm and lifeless. The same waters that fed empires suddenly became a watery desert, their bounty vanishing overnight. This wasn't just bad luck, it was El Niño flexing its muscle centuries before scientists gave it a name. The same phenomenon that today triggers global weather chaos had a brutal resume long before satellites tracked it. Along Peru's arid coast, the Moche people built sprawling irrigation canals to harness every drop of rain. But when El Niño arrived, their careful planning turned to ruin. Gentle rains became torrents, washing away fields and drowning entire villages under mudslides. Archaeologists sifting through Moche ruins find layers of flood debris sandwiched between eras of prosperity, a stark reminder of nature's fickle rhythm. Yet while Peru suffered, others thrived. In Southeast Asia, El Niño's fingerprint appeared in the opposite extreme: drought. Monsoons faltered, reservoirs dried up, and the Khmer Empire's intricate waterworks at Angkor Wat stood useless under a cloudless sky. But here's the twist: some cultures didn't just survive these shifts, they weaponized them. The Chimu kingdom, rising after the Moche's collapse, engineered reservoirs so vast they could weather decades of drought. Their capital, Chan Chan, sprawled across 20 square kilometers, its walls adorned with fish motifs, a defiant nod to the very ocean that once betrayed their predecessors. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, Polynesian navigators used El Niño's altered currents to their advantage. When regular trade winds weakened, they exploited reverse flows to reach distant islands, turning a climate crisis into a colonization wave. These societies didn't just endure chaos, they decoded it, building flexibility into their very foundations. A Moche farmer might have seen El Niño as a death sentence, but a Chimu engineer viewed it as a puzzle, one with solutions etched in adobe and stone. What's haunting is how these ancient adaptations mirror our modern struggles. Today's farmers from Iowa to India still watch the skies for El Niño's signs, just as the Khmer once did. The difference: we have forecasts and dams, yet vulnerability lingers. The ruins of Chan Chan whisper a warning. Civilizations that outlast the storm aren't the strongest, but the most adaptable. Because El Niño isn't just a weather pattern, it's a test, one that's been humbling humanity for millennia. When temperatures began dropping in the 14th century, Europe had no idea it was stepping into a centuries-long chill that would rewrite its destiny. Glaciers in the Alps lunged forward like slow-moving avalanches, swallowing entire villages in Switzerland. Norse settlers in Greenland, who had thrived for generations on dairy farms and walrus hunts, suddenly found their pastures freezing solid. Their last written records are desperate accounts of weddings held in starving desperation, hoping for divine intervention as the ice crept closer. This wasn't just a cold snap, it was the Little Ice Age, a climatic curveball that proved even a slight dip in the thermometer could unravel civilizations. Yet in the face of frostbite and famine, humanity didn't just surrender, it adapted. Dutch engineers transformed frozen misery into opportunity, inventing ice skates and perfecting windmills to drain waterlogged fields, turning the Netherlands into an agricultural powerhouse. Meanwhile, the British embraced turnips, a hardy crop that could weather unpredictable growing seasons, while vineyards in France relocated south, accidentally improving wine quality in the process. Even art bore witness to the cold Pieta Bruegel's snowy landscapes didn't just capture beauty, they documented a world where winters lasted longer and bit deeper. But not all adaptations were so peaceful. When crops failed in France in 1789, bread prices skyrocketed, and starving crowds stormed the Bastille, helping spark a revolution that would topple a monarchy. Half a world away, China's Ming dynasty collapsed under the weight of droughts and floods linked to the same climatic shifts. The lesson: societies that couldn't pivot fractured under the pressure, while those that innovated found ways to endure. What's haunting is how these historical echoes resonate today. The Vikings' vanished Greenland colonies aren't just ruins, they're case studies in what happens when a culture can't outthink the climate. The Dutch windmills, meanwhile, stand as monuments to human ingenuity in the face of nature's whims. The the Little Ice Age reminds us that climate isn't just about weather. It's the unseen hand quietly shuffling the deck of history, deciding who thrives and who becomes a cautionary tale. And as we face our own era of climatic uncertainty, those centuries of frost and famine whisper a question: will we be the ones who adapt or the ones who vanish beneath the ice? The Nabateans didn't just survive the desert, they mastered it. Imagine a civilization thriving in a place where rain might only fall a handful of times a year. Yet these ingenious builders of Petra turned barren rock into a lifeline, carving intricate cisterns and channels into sandstone cliffs to capture every fleeting drop. Their entire empire was built on stolen water, hidden in plain sight. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, the ancestral Puebloans faced the opposite problem: droughts so relentless they abandoned their mesa-top villages for the shelter of cliffs. Their towering dwellings at places like Mesa Verde weren't just homes. They were fortresses against a changing climate, tucked into alcoves where shade and seeping groundwater offered refuge. But these adaptations weren't just about survival, they reshaped cultures. The Nabateans' water technology became a source of power, their control over desert springs allowing them to tax caravans crossing their lands. Their gods, too, reflected their world. Duces, the vine-covered deity, symbolized life wrung from dryness. For the Puebloans, cliff dwellings fostered tight-knit communities where every hand was needed to haul water or guard stored grain. Their kivas, circular ceremonial pits, may have been spaces to pray for rain, but also to bind people together when the skies turned cruel. Yet even the cleverest solutions had their breaking points. When the Puebloans' droughts stretched beyond decades, even their cliffside strongholds couldn't hold back starvation. And Petra, its glory faded when trade routes shifted, proving that no amount of engineering could outlast a changing world. These civilizations didn't just adapt to climate, they became defined by it, their identities forged in the crucible of scarcity. What's striking is how these ancient responses mirror modern dilemmas. Today's cities in drought-prone regions, from Los Angeles to Cape Town, still grapple with the same question the Nabateans did: how to squeeze life from a parched landscape. The difference is scale. Where they carved cisterns, we build desalination plants. But the underlying truth remains: climate doesn't just test a society's ingenuity, it writes its story, shaping everything from architecture to faith. And as we face our own era of upheaval, these ancient whispers remind us that resilience isn't just about surviving the storm, it's about who we become in the process. Rain dances weren't just ceremonies, they were desperate negotiations with the sky. The Pueblo peoples of the American Southwest spun in rhythmic circles, their bodies becoming living prayers for moisture, while in India, priests chanted Vedic hymns to coax rain from stubborn clouds. These rituals did more than symbolize hope. They gave people agency in the face of chaos, turning unpredictable weather into something they could plead with, bargain against, even scold. The Aztecs took it further, sacrificing children to Tlaloc during droughts, not out of cruelty, but because they believed tears were the ultimate offering to a rain god. Yet this cultural armor had its limits. When the rain still didn't come, societies faced a brutal choice: double down on tradition or abandon what had always worked. The Greenland Norse clung to livestock farming as temperatures dropped, refusing to adopt Inuit sealing techniques even as their cows starved. Their identity was tied to pastoral life, and without it, they no longer knew who they were. Meanwhile, the Rapa Nui of Easter Island carved their iconic moai statues even as deforestation triggered soil erosion, their cultural obsession outpacing ecological reality. What's fascinating is how some cultures rewrote their own rules. In ancient China, when rain prayers failed, emperors turned to bureaucracy, creating early weather archives to track cycles over centuries. The Maya, despite their ritualistic astronomy, adjusted crop choices when droughts lingered, switching from water-hungry maize to hardy cassava. These weren't rejections of tradition, they were evolutions, proving resilience meant knowing when to let go. The tension between faith and flexibility still echoes today. Modern drought-stricken communities perform rain dances alongside cloud-seeding drones, blending ancestral wisdom with technology. Perhaps that's the real lesson, not that ancient rituals were naive, but that the smartest cultures learned to balance reverence with reinvention. When the skies refused to cooperate, survival didn't just depend on pleasing the gods, it required listening to the earth itself. The Sahara wasn't always a sea of sand. It was once a realm of lakes and grasslands so vast you could have hunted crocodiles where dunes now tower. Cave paintings in Algeria's Tassili and Adja show hippos wallowing in water, giraffes nibbling acacia trees, and humans herding cattle across savannas that would crumble to dust. This wasn't some lost paradise, it was the Sahara's reality just 5,000 years before our time, when monsoon rains crept farther north, turning the desert into a temporary Eden. But when those rains retreated, the landscape transformed with terrifying speed. Pollen records show grasses vanishing within centuries, replaced by scrubland, then nothing at all. The lakes evaporated into salt flats, leaving behind fish bones and shell middens as eerie tombstones. And here's where climate becomes a puppeteer of history. As the Sahara dried, its people didn't just fade away, they migrated, carrying their skills toward the Nile. Archaeologists trace this exodus in pottery styles and cattle DNA, suggesting the newcomers mingled with indigenous groups along the river. Some scholars argue these refugees may have supercharged Egypt's rise, contributing agricultural knowledge that helped harness the Nile's floods. Imagine a civilization famed for pyramids and pharaohs might owe its spark to climate refugees fleeing a dying green world. Yet the Sahara's story isn't just about loss. In Chad's Gobero cemetery, graves from both wet and dry eras lie side by side, their skeletons telling opposite tales. One group buried with harpoons and hippo bones, the other with ostrich eggshell beads perfect for storing scarce water. These weren't passive victims of change, they were innovators, constantly rewriting their survival playbook. Even today, the desert guards secrets from its greener past, like the Garamontes of Libya, who dug 1,000-mile tunnels to tap fossil water, building an empire in the wasteland their ancestors would scarcely recognize. The real lesson isn't that climate determines destiny, but that it sets the stage, and we are the actors improvising our lines. The Sahara's sands whisper a warning. Today's bustling cities might one day be someone else's cave painting, a relic of a world that vanished when the skies changed their mind. Beneath the churning waters of the North Sea lies a lost world, Doggerland, a vast landscape that once connected Britain to Europe. Fishermen still haul up mammoth bones and ancient tools in their nets, remnants of a place where forests stood and rivers carved valleys now drowned under 40 meters of water. This wasn't some slow encroachment. Seas rose at breakneck speed as glaciers melted at the end of the last ice age, swallowing an area the size of modern-day England in mere centuries. Imagine entire generations watching shorelines creep closer, villages abandoned as saltwater poisoned wells, until one day the waves finally erased the last hilltop. But Doggerland wasn't alone. On Greece's Peloponnese coast, the sunken city of Pavloptri tells a quieter tragedy. Its stone foundations and pottery-strewn streets, preserved under 4 millennia of seawater, suggest a more sudden fate, perhaps a tsunami or catastrophic storm surge. Unlike Doggerland's slow drowning, Pavloptri's disaster arrived in hours, turning a bustling Bronze Age port into an Atlantis-like myth. Even Egypt's fabled Heracleion, lost for centuries beneath the Mediterranean, reveals statues of gods toppled mid-stride, as if the sea demanded instant surrender. What unites these sunken cities isn't just bad luck, it's humanity's gamble with coastlines. The same waters that fed trade and fish harvests could swallow civilizations whole when storms strengthened or tides climbed. And while today's rising seas feel unprecedented, the lesson from places like Pavlovtry is chilling. Sometimes the ocean doesn't inch forward, it lunges. Modern cities built on reclaimed land or sinking deltas might do well to study these ancient ruins, because history's drowned worlds weren't just accidents, they were warnings written in salt and stone. Tsunamis don't just vanish when the waves recede, they leave scars on history itself. Take the monstrous wave that slammed into Crete in 365 CE. A disaster so brutal it lifted entire ships onto rooftops and drowned Alexandria's bustling ports. Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus described walls collapsing, as if struck by battering rams, while beaches suddenly lay stripped of sand, revealing ancient ruins no one knew existed. But this wasn't just one bad day, it was a pattern. Centuries earlier, the same fault line may have triggered tsunamis that contributed to the Minos' downfall, their coastal palaces crumbling under walls of water. Across the world, Japan's oldest chronicles tell eerily similar tales. The Nihon Shoki, written in 720 CE, recounts earthquake waves swallowing villages whole, leaving survivors to speak of the sea running away before roaring back with unstoppable force. These weren't just legends, they were eyewitness accounts of events now confirmed by sediment layers along Japan's coast, where geologists find chaotic deposits of shells and ship timbers sandwiched between peaceful soil. The terrifying truth, these ancient tsunamis were far from isolated. In the Pacific Northwest, indigenous oral histories describe a night of shaking and flooding that matches geological evidence of a massive quake around 1700. Even the Mediterranean's seemingly calm waters hide a violent past. Underwater landslides near Sicily once sent waves crashing into North Africa, while the volcanic collapse of Santorini likely unleashed tsunamis that reached as far as Egypt. What makes these events so chilling isn't just their power, but their silence. Unlike wars or famines, tsunamis leave few survivors to document the horror. Instead, we piece together their stories from fractured pottery in elevated caves, or sudden shifts in trade routes as ports vanished overnight. The real warning lies in how casually these catastrophes were forgotten until the next wave came. Today, as we build cities atop these very shores, the past whispers a simple question. Are we remembering or just repeating? The summer of 1816 dawned with a cold that crept into bones and crops alike. In New England, farmers watched helplessly as frost blackened their June cornfields, while Swiss villages awoke to snowdrifts in July. This wasn't just an odd season. It was the chilling aftermath of Mount Tambora's eruption in Indonesia the year before, a blast so violent it hurled millions of tons of ash into the stratosphere, veiling the sun's warmth like a dusty curtain. But the real tragedy wasn't the volcano itself, it was the domino effect that followed. Grain prices skyrocketed across Europe, triggering bread riots from France to Germany. In Ireland, desperate families ate nettles and sawdust, their hunger so severe it previewed the Great Famine decades later. Even Thomas Jefferson, retired at Monticello, wrote of a year of suffering, his orchards yielding only withered fruit. Yet within this global crisis lay astonishing acts of resilience. Swiss farmer Jacob Künzler recounted how villagers in the Alps butchered livestock early, smoking the meat to outlast the endless winter. Meanwhile, German vintners, faced with unripe grapes, accidentally invented a sharper, more acidic wine, today's Rheinhessen, vintage of starvation. Some migrations bore unexpected fruit too, as New England farmers fleeing ruined fields sparked America's westward expansion, their wagons rolling toward Ohio's marginally warmer soils. What made this catastrophe unique wasn't just its scale, but its documentation. Unlike ancient eruptions lost to myth, Tambora's impact was recorded in newspapers, diaries, and even literature. Mary Shelley penned Frankenstein during that gloomy summer, her tale of unnatural darkness mirroring the skies outside. Scientists later connected the dots. Tree rings showed stunted growth. Paintings from the era captured eerie red sunsets caused by airborne particles, and ship logs noted bizarrely cold ocean currents. The haunting parallel to our era, Tambora's aftermath revealed how tightly global food systems were linked even then. A single volcanic hiccup in Asia starved weavers in Lancashire who couldn't afford grain, which in turn collapsed demand for American cotton. Today, with supply chains spanning continents, we're just as vulnerable, only now the threats aren't just volcanoes. The real lesson of 1816 isn't about surviving one bad year. It's about recognizing how fragile our interconnected world remains when the climate decides to twist the dials. Rome's marble columns and sprawling roads couldn't shield it from the silent siege of drought. While barbarian invasions and political corruption often steal the spotlight in Rome's collapse, tree rings from the empire's final centuries tell a quieter, more insidious story. In North Africa, where vast wheat fields once fed Rome's insatiable appetite, oak records reveal a relentless drying trend, decade after decade of rainless skies that turned fertile plains into cracked wastelands. Aqueducts, those engineering marvels designed to defy nature's whims, began coughing dust instead of water, and when the grain ships from Egypt faltered, so did Rome's grip on its people. But drought didn't just starve stomachs, it starved loyalty. As harvests shrank, taxes grew heavier, squeezing farmers who could no longer meet imperial quotas. In Antioch, rioters burned granaries rather than submit to hunger. In the countryside, landowners abandoned their estates, fleeing to cities already teeming with desperate mouths. Even the legions, once Rome's iron backbone, grew restless as pay arrived late or not at all. A soldier's oath meant little when his family hadn't eaten in weeks. What's chilling is how closely Rome's decline mirrors earlier collapses. Like the Akkadians and Maya, they'd built an empire perfectly adapted to a climate that no longer existed. Their sprawling cities depended on a delicate web of trade routes and predictable harvests, both shattered when the rains failed. Yet Rome's real vulnerability wasn't just its dependence on rain, but its refusal to adapt. While the Nabateans carved cisterns into cliffs and the Chimu engineered reservoirs, Rome kept doubling down on grandeur, building more baths and fountains even as aquifers emptied. The lesson etched into Rome's ruins isn't about strength or weakness, it's about humility. No amount of military might could compensate for withering fields, no law could command the clouds to open. And as modern cities from Phoenix to Cape Town grapple with their own thirsty futures, those ancient tree rings whisper a warning. Civilization's greatest threat isn't always the enemy at the gates. Sometimes it's the sky itself turning its back when we need it most. The Maya didn't just build cities, they engineered water. Beneath the jungles of the Yucatan, their reservoirs were feats of precision, carved into limestone and lined with plaster to hold thousands of gallons. Ticol's central reservoir alone could have quenched 30,000 people for 18 months, a lifeline in a land where rain was seasonal and unpredictable. But when droughts stretched for years, even these marvels turned to dust bowls. Wars once fought over territory or tribute became desperate scrambles for the last muddy puddles. Inscriptions at kingdoms like Dos Pilas tell of cities sacking neighbors not for gold but for cracked reservoir beds. A single phrase repeats like a death knell: they took the water. Yet the Maya's tragedy wasn't ignorance, it was foresight met with limits. Their engineers designed canals to funnel rainwater with millimeter-perfect slopes and filters using quartz sand to purify drinking supplies centuries before modern science. At Palenque, they even harnessed natural springs to create pressurized fountains. But no system could compensate for what tree rings now reveal: a mega drought lasting nearly a century where rainfall dropped by half. The same rulers who boasted of capturing enemy kings watched their people drink from stagnant pools crawling with parasites. Glyphs shift from celebrating victories to begging gods for rain, then finally silence. What's haunting is how modern solutions echo their ancient blueprints. In today's Yucatan, engineers revive Maya techniques, using restored reservoirs to combat droughts worsened by deforestation. Their limestone filtration methods inspire low-cost water purification in arid regions worldwide. Even their mistakes guide us. Studies show how Maya overpopulation and tree clearance may have worsened their droughts, a warning for our own resource strains. The Maya didn't vanish, their wisdom simply waited, buried in ruins until we faced the same thirst. Their legacy isn't just a cautionary tale, it's a playbook written in stone and silt for surviving the next dry age. The Sea Peoples didn't just appear from nowhere, they erupted onto history's stage like a force of nature itself. Ancient Egyptian carvings depict these mysterious raiders in swirling battles, their ships with bird-headed prows crashing onto shores from Anatolia to the Nile Delta. But here's what those carvings don't show, the desperation that might have propelled them. Recent studies of sediment cores from their suspected homelands reveal something startling. Prolonged droughts right before their invasions, turning fertile coasts into cracked earth. These weren't just warriors, they could have been starving families with nothing left to lose, their migration a frantic search for survival rather than conquest. Half a continent away, another climate exodus was unfolding on the steppes. The Huns, later feared by Rome as horse lords of destruction, may have begun their westward march because the grasslands that fed their herds withered under endless drought. Chinese chronicles note strange movements among northern tribes right as tree rings from Mongolia show years of stunted growth, nature's breadcrumbs leading to history's upheavals. Even Attila's infamous violence takes on new light when you consider his people might have been cornered animals, lashed forward by a changing climate they couldn't outrun. But these weren't isolated tragedies. In the Pacific, entire islands were abandoned as rising seas swallowed taro patches, while in North America, the ancestral Puebloans' cliff dwellings tell of communities retreating to higher ground as droughts scorched their fields. What connects these stories isn't just movement, it's the agonizing choices behind it. Do you stay and pray for rain or risk everything on an unknown horizon? The echoes today are impossible to ignore. Modern borders might be firmer, but the forces driving ancient migrations, drought, rising seas, failing crops haven't vanished. They've just traded chariots for trucks and scrolls for satellite images. When we look at those Egyptian carvings of the Sea Peoples, we're not just seeing invaders, we're seeing humanity's oldest story, written in the ink of climate and desperation. And that story isn't finished yet. History's greatest tragedies often come with built-in instruction manuals if we're willing to read them. Take the Maya's reservoirs now being replicated in modern Honduras to combat drought, or the Nabateans' water channels inspiring desert agriculture in Israel. These aren't just archaeological curiosities, they're blueprints for survival in a world where the past's crises are becoming our daily headlines. Yet for every lesson we've learned, there's a warning we've ignored. Venice's flooding echoes Doggerland's drowning, while California's megadroughts mirror the Akkadian Empire's collapse. The difference? Ancient societies lacked satellites and climate models. We have no excuse for surprise. What's striking isn't just how similar our challenges are, but how differently we're responding. While Angkor Wat's rulers kept building temples as monsoons failed, today's engineers in Bangkok elevate entire neighborhoods above flood levels. Where the Greenland Norse stubbornly imported European farming techniques, Iceland now pioneers geothermal energy to outmaneuver volatile weather, the common thread. Societies that adapt their core identities, not just their infrastructure, tend to endure. When the ancestral Puebloans abandoned their cliff dwellings, they didn't vanish. They transformed into the Hopi and Zuni, carrying forward knowledge we're only now rediscovering. Yet the most pressing lesson isn't about technology, it's about time. The Bronze Age collapse unfolded over decades, giving civilizations moments to pivot that they squandered on infighting. Today's climate shifts move faster, but so does our information. When Dutch engineers build floating neighborhoods or Navajo solar farms revive ancient water principles, they're proving history's warnings can be heeded, just not by repeating the same desperate gambits. The real test isn't whether we'll act, but whether we'll do so before the ruins we're racing to avoid become our own. New Orleans levees crumbled under Hurricane Katrina's fury in 2005, but the tragedy wasn't just modern engineering failing, it was history rhyming. The same marshes that once protected indigenous communities like the Chitimacha from storm surges had been drained and paved over, stripping the land of its natural shock absorbers. Centuries earlier, the Maya faced identical consequences when they cleared forests for farmland, disrupting rainfall patterns that sustained their reservoirs. Fast forward to 2013, when Syria's worst drought in 900 years displaced farm families, fueling unrest that spiraled into civil war, an eerie parallel to the Akkadian Empire's collapse when drought pushed desperate herders into settled lands. These aren't coincidences, they're cautionary tales playing on loop. Today's climate refugees mirror the sea peoples of the Bronze Age, fleeing lands that can no longer sustain them. In Bangladesh, rising tides swallow villages just as Doggerland vanished beneath the North Sea, while California's wildfire survivors echo the ancestral Puebloans abandoning scorched settlements. Yet some communities are flipping the script. Arizona's Hopi tribe, descendants of those Puebloans, now revive drought-resistant ancient crops like amaranth as groundwater dwindles. Rotterdam, built on land below sea level, floats entire neighborhoods a high-tech twist on the Mayas' raised field agriculture. Even Syria's war-torn regions see experiments with Nabatean-style underground irrigation, proving old solutions can outlast empires. The haunting truth, we've always known how to adapt, we just keep forgetting. Venice's floodgates borrow concepts from the K.H. Mers Reservoir gates at Angkor Wat, while Texas wind farms channel the same ingenuity the Dutch used to harness tempestuous North Sea winds. The difference this time is scale. Where ancient collapses were regional, today's crises ripple across supply chains and continents, but so do the solutions. When indigenous fire management techniques curb Australian wildfires or Chicago's permeable pavement mimics Petra's water-capturing stone, history stops repeating and starts teaching. The question isn't whether we'll heed these lessons, but whether we'll do it before the next Katrina or Syria becomes inevitable. Because the blueprint for survival isn't locked in some futuristic lab, it's buried in the very ruins we've spent centuries ignoring. Ancient skywatchers may not have had telescopes or satellites, but they noticed something modern science is only now confirming. The sun's subtle rhythms shape Earth's weather in ways we're just beginning to understand. Those Babylonian priests tracking Venus weren't merely stargazing, they were documenting a pattern. Recent studies of ice cores and tree rings reveal a startling synchronicity between solar minimums periods when the sun's activity dims and prolonged droughts that toppled empires. When the Maya recorded black suns in their codices, they might have been describing coronal mass ejections that scrambled global weather systems, triggering the very famines that fractured their city-states. What's fascinating isn't just that the ancients spotted these connections, but how. Without spectrometers, they relied on naked eye observations of sunspot cycles, linking darker solar phases to cooler, drier years. Chinese astronomers kept meticulous logs of auroras and solar halos, noting crop failures that followed these celestial anomalies. Even the Norse sagas, with their tales of the Fimbul winter, a 3-year winter heralding apocalyptic cold, might have been recounting the aftermath of a solar storm, its atmospheric fallout chilling continents. Now, modern researchers are blending these ancient methods with cutting-edge tech. Solar physicists team up with historians to cross-reference medieval eclipse records with climate data, uncovering how a quiet sun coincided with the Little Ice Age's bitter winters. In Arizona, astronomers collaborate with Hopi elders, merging satellite imagery with oral traditions about solar cycles and desert springs. The goal isn't nostalgia, it's pragmatism. Satellite data only stretches back decades, but petroglyphs tracking solar events span millennia, offering clues to long-term patterns our short-term models miss. The irony, while we've mastered predicting solar flares, we've lost the holistic view that let ancient cultures anticipate their earthly consequences. The Maya didn't just fear drought, they planned for it, stockpiling water during solar maximums when rains were reliable. Today, as we face our own era of climate volatility, the past whispers a radical idea. Maybe the next breakthrough in weather forecasting isn't just in supercomputers, but in the forgotten almanacs of those who first decoded the dialogue between stars and storms. After all, the sun hasn't changed its habits, we've just stopped listening as closely. Rebuilding doesn't always mean reinventing, sometimes it means remembering. In the Andes, where modern agriculture struggles with erratic weather, farmers are turning back to a 3,000-year-old solution: terraces. These stepped fields, once carved by the Inca, do more than prevent erosion, they create microclimates. Each level acts as a temperature buffer, shielding crops from frost one elevation and scorching sun the next. And it's working. Communities using these ancient techniques today report harvests up to 60% larger than those relying on flat, industrial farms. Nearby, the same farmers are reviving waru, a system of raised beds and water channels that the Tiwanaku people designed to outsmart droughts and floods. When scientists tested it, they found soil temperatures in these plots stayed 5 degrees warmer during cold snaps, while drainage channels prevented waterlogging during heavy rains. Meanwhile, in India's arid Rajasthan region, centuries-old Joe had simple crescent-shaped earth dams, are making a comeback. These structures, forgotten during the era of concrete and pipelines, capture monsoon rains, allowing water to seep slowly into the ground rather than washing away. Villages that restored their Joe had saw wells that had been dry for decades suddenly brimming with water, even during brutal dry seasons. The secret lies in their simplicity. No pumps, no filters, just gravity and patience. But here's where the real innovation kicks in. Modern engineers aren't just copying these methods, they're upgrading them. In California's Central Valley, drones now map terrain for new terraces based on Inca designs, while solar-powered sensors monitor soil moisture in revived waru plots. In Kenya, Maasai herders blend traditional grass-reseeding techniques with satellite data to restore drought-ravaged pastures. The lesson isn't that old ways are perfect, but that they offer something our high-tech solutions often lack: time-tested resilience. The beauty of this revival lies in its humility. After centuries of assuming newer meant better, we're finally acknowledging that some answers were here all along, etched into hillsides, buried in oral traditions, waiting for the moment we'd wise up enough to look back. The future of survival might just be a partnership between silicon chips and stone tools, where artificial intelligence and ancestral knowledge finally speak the same language. The storms and skies of antiquity weren't just backdrop, they were active players in history's drama, shaping destinies with a flick of wind or a withheld raindrop. Think of the Maya astronomers tracking Venus to predict droughts, or the Nabateans carving cisterns into desert rock, their survival hinging on reading nature's whispers. These weren't passive victims of circumstance, they were innovators, adapting until even their ingenuity met limits we now recognize in our own reflections. Their ruins stand as more than relics, they're mirror fragments, showing us how easily prosperity can crack under climatic pressure. Yet buried in their collapses lies a paradoxical hope. The same societies that faltered also left blueprints for resilience, like the Inca's terraces, now revived to buffer modern crops against erratic weather, or the ancient Johads of Rajasthan, bringing dead wells back to life with nothing but earth and patience. What separates us from them isn't just technology, but choice. We're the first civilization armed with both satellites and ancestral wisdom, able to see storms brewing from space while relearning how to store water in stone. The true lesson isn't that civilizations fall, it's that they rewrite their endings with every decision, to cling to failing systems or pivot, to hoard or share, to ignore the past or listen. As we face rising seas and shifting skies, those voices from the ruins grow louder. They remind us that survival isn't about dominating nature, but dancing with it a step ahead of the next deluge or drought. So tell us, which story from the ancient climate chronicles speaks to you? Is it the Maya's reservoirs, the sea people's desperate migration, or something else? The conversation doesn't end here, it's just beginning.